All right, everybody. It is Tuesday afternoon, and it is time for time management and charting tips office half hour. So glad that you're here. And I've got a couple of things. I've got some stuff that's on my mind. We'll start there, and then we will get to questions, the question section of our time together. But the first half, with the stuff that's on my mind, I think that you're really going to be able to relate to. Okay. And it is completely, I guess I would almost say that one of my signature things is that a lot of this stuff, I draw a lot of inspiration for things like time management and the way that we look at time and the way that we look at even just the way we kind of move through the workplace, how we kind of navigate the workplace. I get a lot of inspiration from non-clinical settings, right? Or non-relevant settings. I had a conversation this morning with someone about how my dog has a GI bug, right? So it's kind of clinical, but not our kind of clinical. And she's going to be on antibiotics and it's a whole thing, right? But like there was some time management and workplace navigation stuff that came up just as a part of that conversation. It's a little more relevant, but what I have to lay on you for today, much more broad. So I was in my office yesterday and it was a nice day out. I had the door open and the parking lot for my office is immediately outside my door. And we recently had it repaved, and as part of the repaving, they need to paint the stripes, right, for each of the parking spaces. And the company that did it missed a couple of spots, right? They missed a couple of stripes. One of them happened to be half of my parking spot, but it's okay. We're working through it. They showed up yesterday with what I think was no notice to me. And the guy showed up. He had, he was an older guy, I would say, 40s, 50s, right? Like this guy has been working for a while. I don't know if he's been striper for that long, but he's been working for a while, right? He's got some life experience, some miles under the belt. And then he had a younger, like apprentice with him, maybe in his 20s, early 20s, like pretty young. So the younger person is just kind of following around, right? Kind of, like, yes, boss, sort of thing. And this guy comes in and he is having a fit because he shows up ready to work, ready to put these two stripes down, right? For these literally two stripes, one for my spot and one for another spot. He's ready to put these down. He's ready to put them down now. But the cars are there. And oh no, we can't possibly solve this problem. There are cars in the parking spaces. What are we going to do? This guy is like huffing and puffing outside of my office. And like, I almost felt like, do I need to go like check this guy's vitals? Like, what is going on? He's really getting upset. And so then he finally says to his protege, like, well, I guess we can't do it. And he took off and left. About 15 minutes later, he must have got in touch with somebody. He came back and actually we figured it out. I moved my car, the other person moved their car, and literally all of 5 minutes they measured out where these parking stripes should go, painted one, moved their equipment, painted the other, and they were gone. They're probably done for the day at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Lucky ducks, right? But it made me think that he showed up unannounced. He was ready to work. He was on his own agenda. And he didn't seem, from what I saw and overheard, he didn't seem to have like planned this, right? Because we would have been notified to move our cars. And he was acting like he was the victim. Like he had somehow been, this was an affront to his professional existence, experience, right? So it made me think of boundaries. That's the reason I'm telling it to you. It made me think of boundaries. This person did not, as we might in a clinical setting, well, then we'll solve the problem, right? That's a big thing that nurses do. We see this problem. It's not necessarily our problem, but we're seeing it. So we're going to take our share of the responsibility. That's appropriate. But then sometimes we keep going with that. And we might take more than our share of the responsibility. And we might get a little bit over invested in solving this problem. In this case, I saw the whole thing play out in front of my office. And I actually felt that like nurse knee-jerk reaction kick in. Like I should go out and see if he needs help and move my car. And I was like, no, this guy is an adult. He's a professional. he can tell me he is fully capable because he's talking just fine. He's fully capable of telling me if he needs me to move my car, right? But I was kind of like in awe. I couldn't believe how effectively he just washed his hands of this and said, not my problem, even though I think it was his problem, right? He probably should have planned a little better. And it made me think of how we don't do that. So why is that? Why was this guy so able to just immediately disengage, immediately pull the plug, walk away? Well, I guess there is no possible way that we could paint these stripes, these two effing stripes. And he just gave up. And it made me think of how willing we are to, as I said, take more than our share of involvement in a solution. So I guess I would exhort us to be like this striper, like this parking lot striper guy. Maybe we should kind of look for ways to protect ourselves, right? To not overcommit, to not give more than our share all the time. That's not sustainable. Can we find ways that we can just say, you know what? I can't do it. You know what? Not my problem. You know what? This can't be solved. Not by me. Somebody else can stand, right? So this guy, as far as he knew, he showed up that day, put his clothes on, got in his truck, drove over here, and thought he was going to be dealing with pavement issues. He did not know he's going to be an inspiration. He had no idea, right? And it's all in how you look at it, I guess, right? He was an inspiration, not necessarily in a good way, but it really made me think that look how easy it was for him. And, is it a gender thing? Maybe, right? Women, most nurse practitioners are women. We are socialized to be the problem solvers, to be the fixers. That's kind of how our society is built. And that's kind of how a lot of us, whether it was explicitly given to us as instruction or it was implicit and just sort of implied, and we sort of picked that up, we read between the lines, it's something that kind of comes to women, unfortunately. So we have the opportunity to say, no. And it's actually kind of a luxury. I felt like this guy had such a luxury that we may even recognize opportunities in our regular day-to-day clinical life where we can easily say, there's no way I could paint that stripe, so to speak, right? You got to move the car. And we don't. We might recognize when we could, but we don't. Maybe we can shift that a little bit. Maybe we can nudge that a little bit. Maybe we can start saying, can you move that car so that I can paint this stripe, instead of finding a workaround for how we could paint the stripe with the car there without getting paint on the car, but still getting the stripe done correctly, that sort of thing, right? So let's think about that. What's your stripe? What's a professional setting today? Probably even in your clinical day, but definitely within the last week, I'm sure you had your equivalent of that experience where you needed to paint a stripe and you couldn't because there was a car in the way. And you didn't just walk away. You didn't just say, someone needs to move that car. So that's my thought for the week. Okay, that's my little inspirational pep talk thought. I've got also a question that I'm going to pull this up right now. And we're going to talk about this because I think this is a good one. I think that this is good for this type of person, but it's good for anyone, right? So here's the question. The new NP who is seeing 18 to 24 patients a day, right? Combination of scheduled patients and walk-ins, using Athena for charting and having a hard time closing charts the same day and managing all the other stuff, all the inbox stuff, right? All roads lead to the inbox. And feeling overworked, exhausted, and taking work home and concerned about burnout. What do they do? Okay. Here's the red flag. What's the red flag in what I just said? New NP, 6 months experience, 18 to 24 patients a day, using Athena for charting, having trouble closing stuff the same day and getting all of this inbox stuff done in a reasonable amount of time. The red flag in all of that is telling me which system you're using for charting. I don't care. That has nothing to do with it. The charting system is so secondary, right? I've used Athena. I don't love it. But there's the perfect EHR system doesn't exist, right? So the EHR system is not the problem. Your charting system, not the problem. There are a lot of other things that can be the problem, but I want you to right away stop blaming the charting system. That's just something that we hide behind, right? To make ourselves maybe feel a little bit less personally responsible, or just make ourselves feel a little less bad. Because it feels bad to be office neighbor's dog. It makes us feel bad to be behind on charting. We want to do a good job, right? Like we would become parking lot page strippers if we didn't care, right? We would just be like, well, I can't do it. Sorry, bye. That's not us. We became nurse practitioners because we want to do a good job, right? And if we find ourselves struggling with that, we want to get maybe to the root cause. And we look sometimes, we bark up the wrong tree, right? Dog barking, bark up the wrong tree. So stop blaming your charting system because it's not the charting system. Yes, some of them are very cumbersome, very old, antiquated, weird updates, weird workflows. Yes, and some of them are much easier to use. But I have seen people who are using I won't name names, but who are using best in class, top of the line charting systems who have 300 charts open. So what's their excuse, right? Like you can't say, oh, well, I use this crappy charting system. We use like kind of the Cadillac version of the charting system. So I don't know if you can blame the charting system. I would say, let's look at a different element. Let's look at the fact that you have 6 months in on this job, right? You're 6 months into being an NP and you're seeing 20 patients a day. That might be too much. Might need to drive that back. I would ask, what has the training been, right? How have you been trained in terms of both the time management in the visit and how you're handling your note writing and your charting? I would ask what the particulars are as far as how you are, like what the expectations are for all the other inbox stuff. So patient messages, staff messages, notes from other, referrals and refill requests, all this stuff. What kind of support do you have with that? Are you utilizing it fully? If you don't have any support with that, or you can use more support with that, how do you access that additional support? What are the expectations? What kind of support is available? Okay. And then I would also, this is another big one. So like, don't blame the charting system, but here's another one. What is your policy? What is your office's policy when it comes to late arrivals and canceled visits, walk-in visits, that sort of stuff, right? Because if you say that you're seeing like walk-in, you've got your scheduled visits, but then you also have like walk-ins that kind of fill in those blanks. When if you have an empty appointment, how late can somebody get scheduled in that slot? If it's a 20-minute slot, can they get booked at any point in that 20 minutes? Or once the visit starts, if it's a 10 o'clock visit, at 10:01, that slot is no longer available. Or if it is a late arrival, and it's a 10 o'clock visit, and they show up at 10:15 for a 20-minute visit, do they still get seen? Do they still get seen for the full 20 minutes? Or do we say the clock starts ticking at 10, and if they're 15 minutes late, then they only get 5 minutes? Which sounds great, but it's hard to navigate. So there are a lot of pieces there. I would really look upstream. Okay. I would, first of all, try not to blame yourself. Let's get objective data first. Let's see what is the playing field. What's the context where this is happening? Looking at the policies and the procedures and looking at whether there may be opportunities for improvement or change. Can these be adjusted? When was the last time anybody looked at these, right? When was the last time that you actually had a critical look at these policies? And, if you're struggling with something that could be policy related, like a late arrival policy or cancellation policies, you're probably not the only one who's having that experience, right? You may kind of talk to your colleagues and say, everybody hates that policy. Well, maybe strength in numbers, maybe there's something that can be done. Maybe some revisions can be made. Does everybody have the same expectation? Does every member of the team have the same expectation? I have seen it be the case where maybe the provider and the MA both agree that once 50% of the visit has transpired, so 10 minutes of a 20-minute visit, anyone arriving after that needs to be rescheduled. But the secretaries don't know that. So the patient shows up 17 minutes into a 20-minute visit and they get registered and they are now in the system, right? And they're here and they're not turned away. So just because that's the expectation on the clinical side, the administrative side might have a different viewpoint or just may not be aware, right? Like they're living in a different world, which is fine. But how can we get everybody on the same page? And what is everybody's understanding? So there are bigger picture contextual things that are important to be able to understand. Kind of in the same way that you have a patient that can't afford their medications, right? And maybe they're diabetic and they can't afford their insulin and their A1C just keeps going up and up and up. Well, we realize then we find out they can't afford their insulin. Well, then their A1C is really not going to be good at all, right? We're not going to be happy with any of those blood sugar results that we get. So we need to address the insulin. We need to stop, looking at, we still want to look at the labs, but right, like we need to look upstream instead of blaming the patient. Maybe we look at solutions that we can get their insulin at a price that's affordable to them. Right? What are the options there? That's a tall order. That might not be the best example, but you get my drift, right? That it's about looking at the context, right? This isn't somebody who doesn't want to be compliant with their care. They can't, or they're having difficulty, or they're having challenges in being compliant. Can we do something to address those challenges? You can apply so many of the same approaches that you would use with your patients to these sorts of things in your day-to-day, in your clinical experience, right? So if you have the patient, insulin-dependent diabetic, blood sugars just are not controlled, getting progressively worse. They've got a prescription for insulin, but they can't fill the prescription. That's the context. That's where we want to put our energy. You are looking at somebody, doesn't matter what your charting system is, right? It doesn't matter how much experience you have necessarily. Let's look at the context, right? What is that piece that we really need to attack that's going to be that first domino and that's going to make the other things more readily achievable? So if you have horrible policies or no policy, I've seen that too, not advised. But if you have bad policies, no policy, everybody with a different interpretation of the policy because it's way too vague, that could be the place where you need to go and focus that attention to get it fixed. Now, this might be a paint stripe situation where it's not your problem to fix it because you're not the person solving the problem, but it's your problem to bring it up, to identify it as a possible source of a solution. We can call it a problem or we can call it a source of a solution and bring that to admin and then hold them accountable because it's their job, right, for policy and that sort of thing. You can have suggestions, but ultimately it's going to be them. And you can bring it to their attention and then you can see how that goes. Objective data is always going to be your best friend, right? So don't be like, I feel like, no. Every time I get a patient, and last week I've had 5 patients who've done late arrivals and it's thrown me off for the whole morning, the whole afternoon, the whole day, whatever the case is, bring that to the conversation. But having objective data, looking at the context, looking at the big picture, and don't blame yourself. No, that you tried that. It didn't work, right? Don't blame yourself. Don't hide behind the charting system. And don't think it's just a matter of working harder, like working longer hours or bringing charting home. That's not really a solution. It's a Band-Aid. It'll get you through a week, but that's not really a long-term solution, right? So I don't want you to do that either. I want you to look at the context, look at the bigger picture things. In the first place I would look would be things like policies, right? Or workflows, right? So kind of a cousin of a policy. What are the policies? What are the workflows? What are the ways that you handle XYZ? These things that then, when the levee breaks and when these things fall apart, cause you to take longer to chart, take longer to get through the visit, take longer to get through your day. Okay. So tell me what you think. Put your comments down below. Always feel free to send me questions. I love to talk about this stuff. I don't know. I don't know what that says about me. But I love to talk about this stuff and I'm happy to answer your questions and I'm happy to help you to take back your time and put your work life in a better balance, a better harmony, or at least put you back in the driver's seat. Okay. And I will see you next Tuesday for office half hours. Take care.